The morning air in Warrenton, Virginia, carried a heavy stillness. A light mist clung to the courthouse lawn, settling over damp grass like a veil of history. The building itself was modest. Red brick, tall colonial windows, and a white steeple that pointed skyward as if demanding reverence. Inside, the air was close and warm, stirred only by the slow rotation of ceiling fans. Wooden pews creaked beneath the weight of a crowd far larger than usual. Everyone knew today's hearing was no ordinary case. Word had spread across town like fire through dry brush. A tomb guard was set to testify. Not just any guard, but Corporal Ethan Carter, recipient of the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for valor. By dawn, the pews were full. Veterans in faded caps, townsfolk curious for a glimpse of living history, even a few reporters with cameras tucked discreetly at their sides. They all came for him. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out, cutting through the chatter. The crowd obeyed, chairs scraping as Judge Robert Hargrove entered. Tall, severe, draped in his black robe, he carried himself with the practiced confidence of a man used to control. His gray eyes scanned the room like a hawk sizing up prey. He settled into his chair, adjusting his glasses with deliberate calm. "Call the first witness." The door opened, and then the room fell into silence so deep it seemed to press against the chest. Corporal Ethan Carter stepped inside. 28 years old, tall and lean, his face carried a weight beyond his age. His hair was cropped short beneath the formal tomb guard cap. His uniform was immaculate. The dark blue coat of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, white trousers pressed to razor creases, and black shoes polished until they shone like mirrors. Every step he took echoed across the wooden floorboards, crisp and steady. The precision of a soldier who had walked the sacred path at Arlington countless times. Pinned above his heart gleamed the Medal of Honor. The blue ribbon stood stark against his coat, the 5-pointed star catching the fluorescent light. The crowd stirred. A veteran in the back row sat straighter, hand twitching as though to salute. Others simply stared, their whispers dissolving into awe. Judge Hargrove's eyes narrowed. His lips thinned into a line, and as Ethan reached the witness stand, the battle of wills that would shake this small courtroom into history began to take shape. The hush in the courtroom was absolute as Corporal Ethan Carter came to a halt at the witness stand. He turned sharply, every movement marked with the discipline of his calling. For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed frozen. The crowd, the lawyers, even the ceiling fans that stirred the heavy air. All eyes fixed on him, on the uniform, on the gleaming star pinned just above his heart. Judge Robert Hargrove leaned forward in his chair, his hawk-like eyes narrowing as they locked onto the medal. The faintest scowl crossed his face, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority sharpened like a blade. "Corporal Carter," the judge said, his tone clipped, "before you are sworn in, remove that medal. This is a courtroom, not a parade ground." A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Whispers erupted from the pews, disbelief, anger, confusion. Veterans stiffened. One man in the back row muttered something under his breath, but his voice was drowned in the murmurs. Ethan stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides. His gaze lifted, steady, unflinching, as it met the judge's. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the room with unshakable clarity. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Ethan said, "this medal isn't mine. It belongs to the men who didn't come home. I wear it for them." The words settled like thunder without sound. For a moment, no one moved. Then the judge's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the bench in irritation. "I don't care who you think it belongs to," Hargrove snapped. "This is my courtroom, Corporal. I set the rules here. Remove it or you will not testify." Gasps rippled across the rows. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter. A man in a Vietnam veteran's cap clenched his fists, the faded embroidery trembling with his grip. Still, Ethan did not move. His face was carved from stone, his eyes calm but unyielding. The air seemed to thicken, every second stretching into eternity as the weight of decision pressed down on him. Would he defy the bench or submit? At last, with the same precision he used in his sacred duties at the tomb of the unknown soldier, Ethan reached up. His fingers unclasped the ribbon at his neck, slow and deliberate. The Medal of Honor came free, and he held it for a moment, the star glinting faintly in the courtroom's light. Then, without haste, he leaned forward and set it gently on the wooden ledge of the witness stand. The sound it made, a soft metallic clink, cut through the silence like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every breath seemed held. Veterans in the gallery shifted, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others sitting straighter in silent respect. To them, the act was more than compliance. It was sacrifice, one more silent oath kept. Judge Hargrove leaned back, the faintest smirk curling the edge of his lips. "That's better," he said curtly. He flicked his hand at the bailiff. "Swear him in." The bailiff stepped forward, his voice steady but his eyes betraying unease. "Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Ethan raised his hand, his movements crisp. "I do," he replied, voice like gravel under weight. "You may be seated," the bailiff said. Ethan lowered himself into the chair, but even sitting, his posture remained rigid, a soldier's bearing unbroken. His eyes did not meet the judge's again. Instead, his gaze seemed fixed somewhere distant beyond the walls, beyond the courtroom, perhaps back at Arlington, where the silence of the unknown still called to him. But the room had not forgotten. The metal lay there on the ledge, stark against the dull wood, no longer over his heart but still commanding every eye. It seemed to radiate a presence of its own, as though reminding all who looked that it carried the weight of sacrifice, not ceremony. In the third row, a woman whispered softly to her neighbor, "That's not right." Another nodded, her lips pressed tight. The atmosphere of the room had shifted, no longer merely curious but restless, unsettled. The plaintiff's attorney, Paul Grayson, cleared his throat, sensing the tension but pressing forward. He approached the stand with a stack of notes clutched in his hand. His voice was polite, careful, as if aware of the storm that hovered just beneath the surface. "Corporal Carter, please state your name and occupation for the record." "Ethan Carter," he answered, the words precise. "Corporal, United States Army, 3rd Infantry Regiment, stationed at Arlington National Cemetery." The murmur that followed was quieter this time, but still charged. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. The tomb guard, the most disciplined, the most relentless duty a soldier could take. A post of honor that never faltered. Judge Hargrove tapped his gavel lightly, irritation flickering again across his face. "The record will note. Counsel, proceed." Grayson nodded quickly, turning his eyes back to Ethan. The questioning began, routine, procedural, dry. But the crowd wasn't listening to the words. Their attention drifted again and again to the small piece of metal lying beside the microphone. It gleamed faintly in the fluorescent light, and with each gleam, the tension grew heavier. The Medal of Honor had been stripped from his chest, but no one could strip the weight of honor from the man who wore it. The courtroom seemed to breathe, again as Corporal Ethan Carter settled into the witness chair. The Medal of Honor rested on the ledge beside him, its blue ribbon stark against the dull wood, drawing every glance like a flame draws moths. Veterans in the back row sat stiffly, their silence carrying a weight words could not. The moment was not forgotten. Attorney Paul Grayson rose, smoothing his press suit. Young, ambitious, and careful, he understood the storm in the room. He cleared his throat, offering Ethan a polite nod before speaking. "Corporal Carter, please state your full name and occupation for the record." "Ethan Carter," he answered, his voice steady, unhurried. "Corporal, 3rd Infantry Regiment, United States Army, stationed at Arlington National Cemetery." The words rippled through the crowd. Arlington, the tomb of the unknown soldier. The sacred duty known only to a select few. Even those unfamiliar with military tradition recognized the weight in that statement. Grayson nodded. "And were you present at the property in question on April 12, 2025? "Yes," Ethan replied, clipped and precise. The attorney pressed forward with procedural questions about land use, easements, and property access. Ethan's answers were clear, each word measured, his discipline showing in his speech as much as in his posture. But the courtroom's attention wasn't on the legal details. Their eyes kept drifting back to the metal glinting under fluorescent lights lying separated from the man who had earned it. Grayson adjusted his notes, sensing the room's focus. "Corporal, can you describe what you saw upon arriving at the property that morning?" "I arrived at approximately 700 hours, Ethan said, leaning forward slightly. "I was visiting my neighbor, Mr. Larson, to discuss access to the road. His family has held that land since the Civil War. The gate was open, but I observed 2 men I didn't recognize measuring the boundary with a laser device. They told me I had no permission to be there. And did you in fact have permission? I've had access for years, Ethan replied, his tone steady. The Larson family entrusted me with a key when I was a boy. I've used it without issue for 2 decades. Grayson gave a brief nod. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge gestured impatiently. Very well. Defense, your witness. Richard Holt, the opposing counsel, stood with a slick smile. Younger than Grayson, with a sharp suit and sharper tone, he carried the air of someone who enjoyed needling his opponents. He strolled toward Ethan, hands clasped loosely behind his back. Corporal Carter, Holt began, his voice light but pointed. You mentioned a key. Can you confirm it was legally given to you? Ethan's gaze shifted briefly to Holt, then returned to the judge. It was a gift from the Larson family. I've used it without issue for 20 years, Holt's smirk widened. 20 years is a long time. Memories fade. People misremember. Isn't it possible your recollection is imperfect? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained firm. I don't forget what matters. The words carried like a hammer strike. A ripple of approval moved through the veterans in the gallery. Holt blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. So, he pressed, trying to recover. You're saying your memory of this alleged agreement is flawless? I'm saying I know what I was told, Ethan replied, his tone granite. And I know what I owe, the smirk faltered. Holt straightened his notes. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Hargrove leaned forward, his gray eyes cold, his tone sharper than steel. Let's keep this focused, gentlemen. We are here for facts, not feelings. This is not a history lesson nor a war memorial. It's a simple property dispute. The words struck the room like a slap. Murmurs swelled. A veteran in a faded cap shook his head in disgust. A woman whispered harshly, "That's not right." But the judge ignored them. His gavel tapped once, silencing the noise. His authority hung heavy yet fragile, like glass under pressure. Grayson shifted uneasily, recognizing the undercurrent. Your Honor, may I reserve the right to recall Corporal Carter later? Fine, Hargrove snapped. Step down, Corporal. Ethan rose, his movements deliberate, precise. For the briefest moment, his eyes lingered on the medal lying on the ledge. Then, without reclaiming it, he turned and stepped down. The courtroom watched in silence as he crossed back to his seat. The Medal of Honor remained behind, small, gleaming, yet carrying the weight of lives, sacrifice, and memory. To some, it seemed the medal itself was testifying, even without words. The tension in the room had shifted. Authority still sat on the bench, but respect had quietly moved elsewhere. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the tall courtroom windows, painting pale stripes across the floor. The air was thick, charged, as though the very walls held their breath. The Medal of Honor still lay on the wooden ledge of the witness stand, untouched, gleaming faintly under the fluorescent lights. It had become more than a decoration. It was a silent protest. Judge Robert Hargrove sat taller in his chair, his robe draped like armor. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp with irritation. To him, the trial had already drifted too far off course. He would not allow sentiment, patriotism, or the ghosts of war to overshadow the authority of his bench. Corporal Carter, the judge's voice boomed suddenly, halting the shuffle of papers and whispers, returned to the stand. Ethan paused mid-step, then turned crisply, his boot striking the floor with soldierly precision. He returned to the witness chair and lowered himself once more, posture rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. The judge's gaze narrowed. This court is not a stage for military display. I will not tolerate grandstanding. You will answer only what is asked. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Ethan said evenly. His tone carried neither resentment nor submission, just the calm weight of discipline. A veteran in the gallery muttered under his breath, "That man bled for his country." The words slipped through the silence like a spark in dry brush. Several heads nodded in quiet agreement. Hargrove's gavel cracked against the wood. Order! This is my courtroom, not a rally. One more outburst and I will clear the gallery. The murmurs died, but the resentment lingered like smoke after a fire. The veterans sat stiffly, eyes burning with restrained fury. For them, the judge's words were more than disrespect, they were a desecration. Attorney Grayson rose cautiously. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to continue with just a few clarifications. Make it brief, the judge said sharply. Grayson nodded and turned to Ethan. Corporal, when you arrived at the Larson property, you said the gate was open. Did you enter with intent to trespass? No, Ethan replied. I entered with intent to visit a family I have known my whole life. I had no reason to believe I was unwelcome. And when you were told by the men on site that you had no right to be there, what was your reaction? I explained my history with the family. They told me I was mistaken. I disagreed, but I did not escalate the matter. Grayson gave a faint smile. No further questions. The judge leaned forward, his tone biting. Mr. Grayson, you're wasting the court's time with sentiment. I will not allow this witness to turn property law into a battlefield. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had endured harsher words from men in power before. Silence was its own strength. The defense attorney, Richard Holt, seized the opening. He stood briskly, voice dripping with condescension. Your Honor, I move to dismiss this witness's testimony as irrelevant. His so-called right of access is based on nothing more than memory and sentimentality. He has no deed, no document, no legal standing, Grayson bristled. Your Honor, with respect, Corporal Carter's testimony speaks directly to established use and community trust. Enough! Hargrove barked, his gavel striking once more. The sound echoed like a rifle crack. The court will not be swayed by military pedigree or emotional appeals. The law is clear. Ownership rests with legal documentation. Tradition and memory hold no place here. The gallery erupted. Veterans rose to their feet, some shaking their heads, others muttering words of disbelief. One man's voice rang out clearly. That medal means more than your gavel ever will. Silence. The judge thundered, his face reddening. Bailiff, clear this courtroom if they cannot contain themselves. The bailiff hesitated, torn between duty and the sight of decorated veterans who had fought for the very freedoms the court represented. His steps faltered, but the judge's glare forced him forward. Sit down, a veteran whispered to another. Don't give him the satisfaction. Slowly, reluctantly, the gallery returned to their seats. But the fire in their eyes burned hotter than before. Judge Hargrove leaned back, his voice colder now, deliberate. This court dismisses the testimony of Corporal Ethan Carter. It is inadmissible and irrelevant to the matter at hand. Remove the witness from the stand. The words landed like a hammer on stone. Ethan's hands tightened slightly against the wood of the chair. His testimony, his truth, struck down not because it lacked merit, but because a judge sought to diminish it. Still, he did not argue. His honor was not tethered to the acceptance of men like Hargrove. Slowly, he rose. His eyes flickered briefly to the medal still resting on the ledge. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to hold its breath, wondering if he would reclaim it, but Ethan stepped away, leaving it where it lay. A collective murmur surged through the gallery. The image seared itself into their minds. A soldier walking away, his Medal of Honor left behind. Dismissed by a court yet dignified in silence. Attorney Grayson clenched his jaw, barely containing his frustration. Your Honor, this is unprecedented. Sit down, counselor, Hargrove snapped. The court will proceed without the distraction of misplaced heroics. But no one in the room believed it was just a distraction. The Medal of Honor, gleaming alone on the wood, became a silent indictment of the judge's arrogance. Each flicker of light on its surface seemed to accuse, to remind, to resist. As Ethan returned to his seat, veterans in the gallery straightened their backs in silent solidarity. No words were spoken, but their eyes followed him with respect deeper than any ruling could erase. The courtroom pressed on with legal arguments, property records, and contracts. But the energy had shifted. Every witness, every statement unfolded beneath the shadow of what had just transpired. Judge Hargrove might have silenced Ethan's testimony, but he could not silence the truth that had been etched into the hearts of all who had witnessed it. And outside the walls of that courtroom, whispers had already begun. The courtroom had fallen into a strained silence. Judge Hargrove's ruling still hung in the air like a sour taste. Corporal Ethan Carter's testimony struck from the record. His Medal of Honor left gleaming, abandoned on the witness stand, but the silence didn't last. A chair creaked in the second row as someone rose slowly to their feet. All eyes turned Colonel Sarah Whitaker. Her uniform was crisp, her silver oak leaves gleaming on her collar, the ribbons on her chest arranged with flawless precision. She stood tall, a woman who carried authority not by demand but by presence. Her voice, when it came, was steady and cutting. Your Honor, she said, I cannot remain silent any longer. Hargrove's head snapped toward her, his expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. Colonel, you are not a party to this case. Sit down. But Sarah didn't move. Her gaze locked onto the judge's with unflinching steel. I was there. I saw Corporal Carter on that battlefield. I saw what he did, and I saw what it cost. The gallery stirred, whispers rushing like wind through dry leaves. The judge's gavel slammed once. Colonel Whitaker, this is a court of law, not a forum for war stories. Sit down before I hold you in contempt. Still, Sarah held her ground. Her voice rose, calm but thunderous in conviction. You can strike his words from the record, Judge. You can dismiss his medal as a distraction, but you cannot erase what he did, or the men who never came home because he stood in their place. The veterans in the gallery sat straighter, their faces lit with something between pride and grief. They knew the tone in her voice. It was the tone of someone who had seen death and chosen truth anyway. Hargrove's glare deepened, but Sarah pressed on, her eyes never wavering. April 12th, she continued, wasn't just another date on a calendar. That was the day our convoy was ambushed in Kunar province. I was pinned under debris, bleeding out. Corporal Carter could have stayed with his unit, but he didn't. He ran back into fire twice. He carried me out on his shoulders while rounds cracked the ground around him. Her words hung heavy, painting images no courtroom could ignore. Some in the gallery lowered their heads, others clenched fists. One veteran blinked back tears, his lips moving silently as if in prayer. Sarah's voice tightened, but it did not break. He didn't just save me. He held the line until air support arrived. 3 men are alive today because of him. 3 families still have fathers and sons because he refused to quit. And you? She finally turned toward the judge, her eyes sharp as blades. You dare to tell him to remove that medal as if it were an ornament? The room trembled with the weight of her defiance. Even the bailiff, standing stiff near the wall, shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between the colonel and the judge. Hargrove's knuckles whitened around the gavel. Colonel Whitaker, you are dangerously close to contempt. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low but unshakable. If telling the truth is contempt, then so be it. Gasps echoed through the chamber. A ripple of approval swept the gallery. Whispers of, that's right, and tell him. Ethan sat motionless at the defense table, his jaw clenched, his eyes lowered. But inside he felt the weight shift. For once, someone else carried the burden he had shouldered in silence for so long. Grayson, the plaintiff's attorney, rose quickly, sensing the moment's magnitude. Your Honor, it is clear the colonel's testimony is relevant to the credibility of this witness. I move that her statement be admitted into the record. The judge's face darkened, but before he could speak, the gallery erupted into applause. Veterans stood clapping, their voices rising above the gavel's desperate strikes. Order! Order! Hargrove roared, pounding the bench. But his authority seemed thinner now, weaker, swallowed by the tide of voices rising against him. Colonel Sarah did not sit. She simply turned her gaze to Ethan, offering the faintest nod. It was not pity, it was acknowledgement, a silent reminder that he was not alone. The Medal of Honor still lay on the ledge, untouched, but in that moment it didn't need to be worn. The room itself bore witness to its meaning. For the first time since the trial had begun, the power in the courtroom no longer belonged solely to the bench. It belonged to truth, carried in the voice of a soldier who refused to let sacrifice be dismissed. And everyone watching knew the judge had overplayed his hand. For a moment, after Colonel Sarah Whitaker's words fell across the courtroom, silence held. It wasn't the silence of fear, nor of submission. It was the silence of a storm gathering its strength. Judge Hargrove sat stiff on his bench, gavel still in hand, his face flushed with indignation. This is outrageous, he barked. This is my courtroom, and I will not tolerate these disruptions. His voice cracked slightly, betraying an unease he could not mask. But the silence did not return. Instead, the first sound came from the back row, the scrape of a chair, the shuffle of boots on hardwood. A veteran in a worn Vietnam cap rose shakily to his feet. His back was bent with years, his hands trembling, but his eyes were steady as they fixed on Ethan. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He raised his hand, curling it into the sharpest salute his frail muscles could still muster. The effect was electric. Another veteran stood, then another, a man with a silver beard and a purple heart pin. A woman in her 50s, her uniform long since retired but her bearing unmistakable. One by one they rose, some saluting, some pressing hands over hearts. Their silence was louder than any words. Judge Hargrove slammed his gavel again. Sit down. All of you sit down or I will clear this gallery. But no one moved. Instead, the stillness gave way to murmurs, voices rising like a tide. Leave it on, someone whispered. He earned it. Another voice. That medal belongs here more than that gavel. Phones came up, their screens glowing like tiny stars. Jake Morales, the young reporter with the YouTube channel, raised his camera higher, his lens capturing every second of the uprising. His live stream counter ticked upward by the hundreds, then thousands. The judge's command grew shrill. Bailiff! Remove those individuals, remove them at once. But the bailiff hesitated. His eyes scanned the gallery. At the saluting veterans, the mothers with photographs pinned to their coats, the children clutching folded flags in their laps. His jaw tightened. He didn't move. Ethan sat motionless at the defense table, his Medal of Honor still resting on the wooden ledge. His hands curled into fists against his knees, the discipline of years keeping him still. Though every muscle in his body ached to act, Colonel Sarah remained standing in the aisle, her gaze sweeping the room, her voice calm but cutting through the chaos. You can silence a man, Judge, but you cannot silence his deeds. And you will not silence those who remember. The gallery erupted in applause, not wild, not disrespectful, but strong, united. The clapping reverberated through the wooden chamber, bouncing off high ceilings until the whole room seemed to shake with the force of it. Judge Hargrove rose from his seat, his face red, his voice straining above the thunder. Enough! This proceeding is in recess! He slammed the gavel so hard the wood cracked. Clear this room now! Still no one moved. Instead, Ethan Carter finally stood. The crowd hushed instantly, as if sensing something sacred was about to unfold. He walked slowly to the witness stand, his boots echoing once more on the hardwood floor. Every step carried the weight of his service, the rhythm of Arlington, the 21 steps, the pause, the turn. He reached the stand, his eyes falling to the medal resting where he had laid it down. His hand trembled only slightly as he picked it up, but he did not pin it back on his chest. Instead, he held it in his palm, raising it high for all to see. His voice, when it came, was steady, carrying through the chamber without effort. I don't wear this for myself, Ethan said, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. I wear it for the ones who never came home, for the names carved in stone, for the mothers who waited at the window and the children who grew up without fathers. The medal glinted in the light, turning slowly as his hand shook. This medal belongs to them, and if you think I'll take it off to make this room more comfortable, then you've already forgotten what it stands for. A murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. Some wept openly now, veterans standing shoulder to shoulder with civilians united in something larger than themselves. Sarah stepped forward, standing beside him. This isn't about contempt, Your Honor, it's about respect. About the values this country claims to hold sacred. Her voice dropped lower, heavier. When you told him to remove that medal, you weren't just silencing a soldier. You were silencing every sacrifice it represents. The judge's face twisted. This is anarchy, he spat. I will not have my courtroom turned into a spectacle. But Jake's live stream told a different story. His counter surged past 20,000. Comments scrolling so fast they blurred across the screen. Stand with the guard, honor over power. This judge should be ashamed. One comment stuck, repeated dozens of times. He guards the tomb. Now we guard him. The moment had transcended the courtroom. Ethan lowered the medal, his knuckles white around it. He looked not at the judge but at the crowd, at the veterans standing in salute, at the families who bore the invisible scars of loss. I'm not here for applause, he said quietly, and I'm not here to win arguments. I came to tell the truth. If that truth costs me, then so be it, but I will not dishonor the fallen to make a gavel happy. The applause returned, rolling like thunder. Hargrove, his authority slipping like sand through clenched fists, shouted again. This court is adjourned. Bailiff, escort them out, now. But the bailiff still did not move. He met Ethan's eyes, gave the smallest nod, and turned away from the bench. It was over. The judge stormed from the room, his robe flapping like a retreating banner. The gavel lay splintered, abandoned on the bench, its authority broken. What remained was the image that spread across the nation within hours. A Medal of Honor recipient standing tall with the medal in his hand, surrounded by veterans saluting in defiance. a retired colonel by his side, and a courtroom unified not by law but by honor. By evening, the video had gone viral. News outlets replayed the scene on loop. Headlines blazed across screens. Judge orders tomb guard to remove Medal of Honor and the people rise. Veterans groups issued statements of outrage. Politicians scrambled to condemn the judge. Social media hashtags trended worldwide. Stand with Ethan, guard the guard, Medal of Honor. In Warrington, candles flickered on courthouse steps, left by strangers who came to pay respect. Flags flew at half-staff outside VFW halls. Across the nation, silence fell in living rooms as people watched the clip and whispered to themselves, "That's what honor looks like." And through it all, Ethan Carter remained silent. The noise of the world surged around him, but he carried the same steady rhythm he always had. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. The uprising was no longer his. It belonged to the people now. The courthouse steps were crowded before the doors even opened again. Word had already spread, faster than ink, faster than rumor. The live stream had exploded across the country, snippets replayed on phones and televisions alike. By the time Corporal Ethan Carter stepped into the gray daylight, the crowd waiting outside was already chanting, "Stand with the guard! Stand with the guard!" Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust into his path. "Corporal Carter, what do you say to the judge's ruling? Do you plan to appeal? How do you feel being dismissed after serving your country?" Ethan said nothing. He kept his gaze forward, his posture precise. To the cameras, his silence spoke louder than 1,000 speeches. Colonel Sarah walked at his side, her hand hovering near his shoulder in quiet solidarity. She deflected reporters with clipped words, "No comment. Not today." Behind them, veterans streamed out of the courthouse. Many still wore expressions of controlled fury, their eyes sharp, their steps defiant. Some carried flags folded under their arms. Others clutched faded photographs of comrades long gone. The air itself seemed charged, as though history had shifted in that cramped courtroom and now spilled onto the streets. That evening, the story was everywhere. On cable news, anchors replayed the moment Ethan raised the medal in his hand, his words ringing out, "I don't wear this for myself. I wear it for the ones who never came home." Commentators leaned forward in their chairs, voices hushed with awe. "That clip," one anchor declared, "is going to be replayed for generations." Online, the movement grew. Hashtags trended across every platform. Guard the guard, stand with Ethan. Honor over power, a video montage swept the internet. Veterans across the country filming themselves, saluting their screens. Families holding up portraits of loved ones lost. School children reciting the pledge with Ethan's words echoing in the background. Meanwhile, Judge Robert Hargrove sat alone in his office, blinds drawn against the night. His phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from colleagues, reporters, even his own staff. Headlines burned across his screen. Judge orders hero to strip Medal of Honor. Public outrage at courtroom humiliation. Calls for resignation mount against Warrington judge. He poured himself a drink, hands shaking, but the glass clinked against the table. His authority, once unchallenged, was unraveling in real time. By the next morning, veterans groups issued formal statements. The American Legion, the VFW, Gold Star families, all demanded accountability. Petitions for Hargrove's resignation gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures within hours. A retired general appeared on national television, his voice heavy with restrained fury. When a judge orders a tomb guard to remove the Medal of Honor, he is not just dismissing a soldier, he is dismissing the sacrifice of all who served. That is unacceptable. Back in Arlington, Ethan returned to duty without ceremony. At dawn, he walked the familiar path. 21 steps across the mat, 21 seconds of pause, the turn, the rifle at his shoulder. Tourists stood in reverent silence as the guard carried out his eternal vigil. Some recognized him instantly. Whispers moved through the crowd, phones rose discreetly. But Ethan's focus never wavered. His cadence was steady, his discipline absolute. To him, the uproar beyond the cemetery gates was distant noise. His duty was here. But to the nation, his silence became the loudest voice of all. Colonel Sarah, however, did not remain silent. She appeared on a primetime interview, Her uniform impeccable, her gaze sharp. The judge thought he was stripping a medal, she told the anchor. What he did was strip away his own credibility. Ethan Carter's honor is not pinned to his chest, it's written in the lives he saved. Clips of her statement circulated widely, cementing her as both witness and advocate. Outside the courthouse, waving flags and holding signs, respect the medal. Honor, not ego. Editorials condemned him, late-night hosts mocked him, and local officials scrambled to distance themselves. Finally, under mounting pressure, Hargrove announced his resignation. His words were clipped, bitter. I no longer believe I can effectively serve this community given the distractions caused by recent events. The statement fooled no one. The people had spoken. Meanwhile, Ethan's story reached beyond America's borders. British tabloids splashed his image on their front pages, the guard who would not bow. In France, veterans laid flowers at their tomb of the unknown soldier in solidarity. In Canada, the Prime Minister issued a statement honoring his discipline. For a brief moment, the world seemed united in reverence, and yet Ethan remained the same. He refused interviews. He declined invitations to speak at rallies. He ignored the endless requests for podcasts, documentaries, even book deals. When asked why by a fellow guard, he answered simply, "It's not my story. It's theirs." He tapped the medal lightly, the metal cool against his fingers, before pinning it back above his heart. The movement, however, refused to fade. On Memorial Day, just months later, the largest crowd in years gathered at Arlington. Families carried flags, veterans marched in formation, children wore paper medals around their necks. At the center of it all, Corporal Ethan Carter marched his 21 steps in silence. When he paused, when he turned, the crowd did not cheer. They stood in perfect silence with him, mirroring his vigil. For a full minute, thousands of people held their breath together, united in respect. It became known afterward as the Long Silence. News outlets captured it, historians recorded it, but those who were present said no video could capture the weight of that moment. It was then the nation understood fully. Honor isn't granted by medals or judges. Honor lives in sacrifice, in silence, in the quiet endurance of men like Ethan Carter. Judge Hargrove vanished into obscurity, remembered only as a footnote in the larger story of his own downfall. But Ethan Carter's story lived on, not in speeches or books, but in the daily ritual of a soldier who walked 21 steps, paused 21 seconds and turned, guarding the memory of the unknown with unyielding devotion. And in every salute, every candle lit, every whispered prayer across the nation, the people stood with him. Years passed, yet the memory of that single courtroom moment refused to fade. Corporal Ethan Carter's story became more than a headline, more than a viral clip. It transformed into a living parable, retold in classrooms, whispered at family dinner tables, and etched into the national conscience. What had begun as a judge's arrogance ended as a lesson that stretched far beyond one trial. At Arlington, the tomb of the unknown soldier remained unchanged. The mat was still swept and scrubbed until every grain of dust vanished. The cadence of the guard steps remained exact, and the silence continued to weigh heavier than words. Ethan, older now but still steady, walked his 21 steps with the same precision he had always carried. Visitors often gasped when they recognized him. Some whispered his name, others simply stood in awe, but Ethan never acknowledged them. His duty had never been about recognition. It was about presence, about showing the fallen that they were never forgotten. In schools across the nation, teachers wove his story into lessons about sacrifice. Children recited his words in assemblies. "I don't wear this for myself. I wear it for the ones who never came home." History textbooks began to include a chapter on the guard who defied silence, accompanied by the famous photograph of Ethan standing in the courtroom, Medal of Honor raised in his hand while veterans saluted behind him. The image became iconic, as enduring as any flag raised or speech given. For veterans, the legacy was deeply personal. Each year on the anniversary of that trial, groups gathered at Arlington to walk the grounds in silence. Some carried unit patches, others brought boots or helmets of the fallen. They left them gently near the marble tomb, not as offerings to Ethan, but as tributes to the brothers and sisters his actions symbolized. The tradition became known as the Vigil of the Living. Colonel Sarah Whitaker's role also endured. She retired from active duty, but her testimony that day echoed across the years. She wrote a memoir not about herself, but about Ethan and the men whose lives he had saved. In its pages, she described the battlefield in Kunar province, the smoke, the chaos, the weight of being carried on another's shoulders. Her book became a bestseller, not because it glorified war, but because it honored the resilience of those who bore its heaviest costs. Sarah often said in interviews, the judge thought he was stripping a medal, but what he really did was reveal what that medal truly means. As for Judge Hargrove, his name sank into obscurity. Mentioned only as a cautionary tale, he lived out his days far from public life. In history, he became little more than a footnote, an example of how arrogance can collapse beneath truth. Ethan never spoke of him. To Ethan, the judge was irrelevant. What mattered was the duty he carried each day, the 21 steps, the silence that needed no defense. The world beyond America also remembered. In France, the tomb of the unknown soldier in Paris saw an annual wreath laid in Ethan's honor. In Britain, schoolchildren read his story alongside those of their own war heroes. In Australia, veterans adopted his words as a mantra, honor over power. His legacy had crossed oceans, binding nations together through shared reverence for sacrifice, and yet, Ethan himself never changed. When asked once by a fellow guard why he never gave speeches, never cashed in on the fame, Ethan smiled faintly. Because the silence speaks louder, he said. For him, legacy was not found in applause or headlines. It was found in the simple rhythm of his steps, in the eternal watch over men and women who had no names, only sacrifices. One winter morning, snow dusted the marble tomb in Arlington. Ethan, older now, still stood his post. His movements had slowed, his hair had silvered, but his posture was iron. Tourists huddled in coats, watching as his boots pressed into the snow. A boy, no older than 10, whispered to his father, "That's him, isn't it?" The soldier from the story. The father nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, remember this moment. One day you'll tell your children." The boy stood straighter, his eyes wide, as Ethan turned with practiced precision. The silence between those steps carried weight, not just for the fallen, but for every living soul who bore witness. By the time Ethan's watch ended, when age finally demanded rest, his story had already transcended him. It belonged to the people now etched into their hearts. Statues were never erected in his likeness, no monuments bore his name. But none were needed. The tomb itself became his memorial, each guard who followed in his footsteps carrying his discipline like a torch. Generations later, when school children visited Arlington, they would still hear the story of Corporal Ethan Carter, the man ordered to remove his Medal of Honor, the man who obeyed yet emerged victorious. And as they watched the guard walk 21 steps across the marble, they would understand. Honor is not something that can be stripped away. It is lived. It is endured. It is remembered forever.